Juliana Redding seemed to be living the dream. At just 21 years old, she was a beautiful model, an aspiring actress building a life in Los Angeles. Friends described her as ambitious, charismatic, and full of energy. From the outside, everything appeared perfect, but beneath the glamorous lifestyle, a darker story was unfolding. In March 2008, Juliana's promising future came to a horrifying end. She was found brutally murdered inside her Santa Monica condominium. The crime scene shocked even experienced investigators. Signs of a violent struggle were everywhere. This was not a random burglary or a crime of opportunity. Whoever entered that apartment appeared to have a specific purpose. Detectives quickly began examining Juliana's personal and professional relationships. As they dug deeper, one name kept appearing. Dr. Munir Uwaydah, a wealthy surgeon and businessman with whom Juliana had previously been involved. What initially seemed like a straightforward homicide investigation soon revealed layers of secrets, failed business deals, and allegations of intimidation. Investigators discovered that Juliana's family had become involved in business negotiations connected to Uwaydah. Those negotiations had reportedly deteriorated into conflict. As detectives followed the evidence, they uncovered connections that raised disturbing questions. Was Juliana simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, or had she become a target because of what she knew? The answers would lead investigators into a world of money, power, and betrayal. What they eventually uncovered would transform the case and point them toward a suspect no one initially expected to understand why Juliana may have been targeted. Investigators focused on her relationship with Dr. Munir Uwaydah. The successful surgeon lived an extravagant lifestyle and was known for his wealth and business ventures. Juliana first became involved with him while working and pursuing opportunities in modeling and entertainment. Their relationship soon became both personal and professional. For a time, Juliana appeared to enjoy the benefits of Uwaydah's wealth and influence. However, the relationship eventually deteriorated. According to investigators, Juliana learned information that caused tension between them. Although the romance ended, their lives remained connected through ongoing business dealings involving Juliana's father, Greg Redding. Around the same period, negotiations between Greg Redding and Uwaydah reportedly began falling apart. Prosecutors later argued that significant financial disagreements emerged, creating conflict between the parties. As detectives interviewed witnesses, they heard troubling stories about individuals who allegedly worked on Uwaydah's behalf. Several people described aggressive tactics used to handle disputes and pressure those involved in business conflicts. One individual stood out during the investigation, Soo Park. Park worked closely with Uwaydah and was often described as an assistant and associate. However, prosecutors would later portray her as much more than that. They alleged she sometimes acted as an enforcer, helping protect Uwaydah's interests through intimidation and pressure. As investigators connected these pieces, they began considering a disturbing possibility. Could the tension surrounding failed business deals have escalated into something far more dangerous? The answer may have been hidden within Juliana's final days, and detectives were about to uncover evidence that would dramatically change the direction of the investigation on the evening of March 15th, 2008. Juliana Redding was at home in her Santa Monica condominium. There was nothing to suggest that within hours she would become the victim of a brutal homicide. At some point during the night, an intruder entered her apartment. Evidence indicated that Juliana fought desperately to defend herself. The struggle was intense and violent. Investigators later determined that she suffered multiple injuries before ultimately being strangled. One of the most chilling discoveries involved an attempted emergency call. Detectives believe Juliana tried to contact 911 during the attack. According to investigators, the call was interrupted before she could receive help. The following day, family members became concerned when they were unable to reach her. Eventually, Juliana's body was discovered inside the condominium, sending shockwaves through her family and community. Detectives immediately secured the scene and began collecting evidence. Among the most important discoveries was DNA recovered from multiple locations throughout the apartment. Forensic experts carefully documented biological evidence found on Juliana's clothing, neck, cell phone, and other areas connected to the struggle. The evidence suggested direct physical contact between the victim and her attacker. Investigators began the painstaking process of comparing DNA samples from people connected to Juliana's life. Former partners, friends, associates, and acquaintances were all considered. Months passed as laboratories analyzed evidence and eliminated potential matches. Then came a breakthrough that changed everything. The DNA recovered from the crime scene matched Kelly Soo Park. Suddenly, the woman who had been connected to Munir Uwaydah became the central focus of the investigation, and detectives believed they were getting closer to uncovering the truth behind Juliana's murder. The DNA evidence transformed the case almost overnight. Investigators now had a suspect whose genetic material appeared throughout the crime scene. Prosecutors argued that the placement of the DNA strongly suggested Kelly Soo Park had direct contact with Juliana during the fatal attack. But identifying a suspect was only part of the challenge. Detectives still needed to establish a motive. As they examined Park's relationship with Munir Uwaydah, they uncovered allegations that painted a troubling picture. Prosecutors claimed Park was more than a simple assistant. They alleged she acted on behalf of Uwaydah in disputes involving business and financial conflicts. Witnesses described incidents in which Park allegedly pressured individuals connected to disagreements involving the surgeon. Prosecutors believe Juliana and her father became targets after negotiations with Uwaydah collapsed. According to their theory, Park may have confronted Juliana as part of an effort to intimidate or pressure her. Instead, prosecutors argued the confrontation turned deadly. The allegations attracted intense media attention. The idea that a young model's murder could be linked to wealthy business figures and failed financial deals captivated the public. Authorities eventually arrested Kelly Soo Park and charged her with Juliana's murder. Meanwhile, investigators continued examining Uwaydah's role in the events surrounding the case. Although prosecutors frequently referenced him during court proceedings, he was never charged in connection with the homicide. As the case moved toward trial, many observers believed the DNA evidence would lead to a conviction. The prosecution appeared confident that the forensic evidence would persuade a jury. Yet the legal battle ahead would prove far more complicated than anyone expected, and the outcome would leave many people stunned. When the trial finally began, prosecutors presented a case built heavily on forensic evidence. They argued that DNA recovered from multiple areas of the crime scene clearly connected Kelly Soo Park to Juliana's murder. Jurors heard testimony explaining how the evidence was collected and why investigators believed it placed Park in direct contact with the victim during the fatal struggle. Prosecutors also outlined their theory regarding motive. They argued that conflicts involving business negotiations and financial disputes provided the circumstances that led to the confrontation. According to prosecution, Park acted in connection with interests linked to Munir Uwaydah and became involved in events that ultimately ended with Juliana's death. However, the defense challenged nearly every aspect of the prosecution's interpretation. Rather than denying that the DNA belonged to Park, defense attorneys questioned how it arrived at the scene. They argued that secondary transfer could explain the presence of the DNA. In other words, the material may have been moved indirectly through shared items or contact with other objects rather than through direct involvement in the crime. The defense also emphasized the absence of eyewitnesses, surveillance footage, or confession. They argued that prosecutors were asking jurors to rely too heavily on forensic evidence without establishing a clear sequence of events. The trial became a battle between competing interpretations of the same evidence. Jurors spent days reviewing testimony and scientific analysis. After lengthy deliberations, they returned with a verdict that surprised many observers. Kelly Soo Park was found not guilty. The decision immediately sparked debate and left lingering questions about whether justice had truly been served. The acquittal of Kelly Soo Park marked the end of the trial, but it did not end public fascination with the case. For Juliana Redding's family, the verdict was devastating. Many believe the evidence pointed clearly toward Park's involvement. Yet the jury concluded that prosecutors had failed to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. The outcome left many questions unanswered. Throughout the investigation, prosecutors repeatedly suggested that larger forces may have been at play. They portrayed the case as one involving power, money, and business conflicts that extended far beyond a single confrontation. At the center of those discussions remained Dr. Munir Uwaydah. Although his name surfaced repeatedly during the investigation and trial, he was never charged in connection with Juliana's death. Years later, The case continues to generate debate among true crime enthusiasts and legal experts. Some believe the forensic evidence was compelling enough to support a conviction. Others argue that the defense successfully exposed weaknesses in the prosecution's theory. What remains undisputed is the tragedy itself. Juliana Redding was a young woman with dreams, ambitions, and a promising future. Her life was cut short in a brutal act of violence that shocked those who knew her. More than a decade later, her murder remains one of California's most controversial true crime cases. The combination of forensic evidence, powerful connections, alleged intimidation, and a surprising verdict continues to raise questions. Was the full truth ever uncovered? Or does a crucial piece of the puzzle remain hidden? Whatever the answer may be, the story of Juliana Redding remains a haunting reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and some mysteries never completely disappear.